Conditions are slowly going to push their way across other areas of the UK throughout the forthcoming week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top stories tonight. The police watchdog has launched an investigation following a crash on the M25, which happened after a police pursuit. Officers from Hertfordshire Constabulary were following a van at around 4 a.m, but they were stood down before the collision. The van went on to hit 3 other vehicles and a woman was killed. Police say her family is being supported by specially trained officers. Now, a £20,000 reward is being offered for information that may lead to the arrest of a suspected chemical attacker. New video has been released of Abdul Zaidi in a Tesco store in North London on Wednesday. Police say his last known movements show he left Tower Hill tube station in the East End just after 9:30 that evening. That was after a woman who was known to Zaidi and her 2 children were attacked. Forensic tests have shown a concentrated corrosive substance was used, either liquid sodium hydroxide or carbonate. The Houthis have been urged to stop their reckless attacks on shipping in the Red Sea following the latest UK-US airstrikes in Yemen. Lord Cameron says the rebel group, which is backed by Iran, has been given repeated warnings to end its campaign, which he says threatens the freedom of navigation and puts innocent lives at risk. 36 sites across 13 locations in Yemen were targeted by coalition forces. A 17-year-old boy has become the fourth person to be charged with the murders of two teenagers in Bristol. 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon were stabbed in the Knoll West area last weekend. A 44-year-old man and two youths, aged 15 and 16, have already been charged with their murders. A man's been arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences following the death of a woman in Essex. 68-year-old Esther Martin was reportedly visiting her 11-year-old grandson when she was attacked in Jaywick. The two dogs, thought to be XL bullies, were destroyed. Experts are yet to confirm their breed. A 39-year-old man remains in custody. Former Wales and British and Irish Lions fly half Barry John has died, aged 79. He played in 5 Lions tests and was nicknamed the King after inspiring their 1971 victory over the All Blacks. His family says he'll be remembered as a loving granddad to his 11 grandchildren. And the King has been seen in public for the first time since leaving hospital. He was spotted smiling and waving at a crowd gathered at St Mary Magdalene Church in Sandringham. King Charles was discharged from hospital last Monday after being treated for an enlarged prostate. Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's time for Free Speech Nation.
A spy unit at the Premier League compiles a dossier on a fan. The Crown Prosecution Service has secret meetings with Stonewall, and rolling your eyes is now a microaggression. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is a show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics. And, of course, we'll have the latest from those lovable culture warriors, as long as they don't get us cancelled before 9 o'clock. So coming up on the show tonight, transgender teacher and journalist Debbie Hayton is going to be here to discuss her new book, Transsexual Apostate, My Journey Back to Reality. I'm going to be joined by writer Helen Joyce to discuss a football fan who has been banned from attending matches until 2026 due to social media posts criticising gender ideology. And we're going to hear about a far-right activist found guilty of inciting racial hatred because he ran an online library of downloadable anti-immigration stickers. And, of course, myself and my fantastic panel will be answering questions from our lovely studio audience. And my guests this evening are comedians Cressida Wetton and Paul Cox. How are you?
All good, thank you.
You're grinning like a Cheshire cat.
I know, I just love being here.
Do you?
Yeah. It's just like a social club for me.
Well, the feeling is very much mutual. How are you?
I'm very like your shirt, Andrew.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, we've both gone with a sort of...
Good taste.
The red, what do you call this? Burgundy?
Maroon?
Maroon?
Yeah, I think so.
OK, and we have this lovely studio audience. Are there any Just Stop Oil activists in the audience? Because if you throw orange at this, the maroon, it's going to clash. It's not going to work. So please refrain for the sake of fashion. Let's get some questions from the audience, though. Our first question comes from Peter. Where's Peter? Hi, Peter.
Hi, good evening. OK, so is war with Iran inevitable? And if so, will we be involved?
OK, so a nice light start to the show. I mean, what do you think?
I think we should steer clear of it.
OK, well, very interesting. Might be a bit late for that because, of course, the US launched airstrikes on Friday night. They're targeting Iranian-backed militia groups in Iraq and Syria. Cressida.
I want to know what that hand was then, Peter.
Well, it's rather convenient that our 2 battleships are both unserviceable. So they can't be going there.
Right.
Yeah.
We can't afford to get in a war. We haven't got enough people in the forces. We haven't got enough ships. Yeah.
No, we haven't got any planes on the battleship.
We haven't got any planes on the battleship.
Right.
Well,
It's
I mean, we're doing
let's have your view on this.
Well,
what do you make of all this?
I mean, at the point where things are being thrown and things are exploding.
Yes.
At what point are we at war? And when I say we, I suppose I'm roping us in with the Americans there, aren't we? Aren't I?
Yes, yes.
But we are close allies, aren't we? So it feels It does feel inevitable.
Well, yeah, but what can we do about this, Paul? I mean, isn't there an obligation to deal with the Houthi rebels? Is that not something...
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get to that, we really need to improve our pre-war banter, because we keep saying things like, we haven't got any ships, there aren't any soldiers, we've got no aircraft. We need to learn from places like Russia and just lie. And, you know, we've got millions of ships and we're going to win. But no,
They have big marches in Red Square with, like, one tank.
Exactly.
And they say, look how good our big tank
That's
is.
what we need to start doing, Leicester Square, after the show. No, I think there's a lot of brinkmanship going on. I don't think either team... This is not a game. Either countries are really that keen on going to war. But what you've got now is you've got the world's superpower who just aren't going to let bad behaviour go unpunished versus the world's super antagonists who can't wait to poke at the US.
Yeah, it is scary stuff. But, you know, on the other hand, you know, you have to deal with problems that arise in the world. The Houthi rebels... well, let's put it this way, they're not the nicest bunch.
Sorry, and I didn't answer that question. You absolutely have to manage... You have to absolutely manage that. And I know I said... It sounds really preposterous to say, but you can't let bad behaviour go unpunished.
No.
If you are the world's superpower, you're effectively policing the world. Because if you don't, someone else will. That's how it works. So unless they do, unless they stop the Houthis, if a rebel group like the Houthis can come in and just fire rockets at you and you go, don't worry about it.
Yeah, commercial ships, nonetheless.
Exactly. Who aren't part of a war, and who are delivering my stuff from Amazon.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's the most important thing in all of this. But,
I believe so.
I mean, Cressida, very quickly, I mean, that is a really important point, isn't it? I've seen a lot of weird support and cheering for the Houthi rebels from elements of the left, and you think, these guys, they won't allow women to work, they won't allow women to travel, they torture and kill gay people, they have a slogan that is curse the Jews. These guys aren't your friends.
Absolutely not. And I just think those people they don't know anything.
Well, maybe they don't know
anything.
anything.
And I think if they did, they'd feel differently. Yeah, I think go in short, sharp at the beginning, bare your teeth, you might never have to use them, you know, that kind of... But I don't know if it's too late for that.
Well, we shall see. Next question now. We've got Abdi. Hi, Abdi.
Hello.
Hi.
Will Michelle O'Neill be good for Northern Ireland?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, to have Sinn Féin with the First Minister of Northern Ireland. That is a historical first.
It really is. I mean, can you imagine 25 years ago the idea that Sinn Féin were leading the Northern Irish Parliament?
I couldn't imagine it, and nor would I want it, personally.
No.
There we go.
However, what we found is a situation of 2 years of absolutely no parliament whatsoever, which is no good for anybody. And whoever's in charge, we need to bring democracy back together. And I think some leadership's better than no leadership. I think as long as they keep the rhetoric dialed down, they will be OK.
Well, I mean, Michelle O'Neill has been a bit mealy-mouthed when it comes to IRA atrocities and the background to the IRA and all of that. Why not an outright condemnation? Now would be the good time for that, I think.
I guess because the Sinn Féin are backed by the people that used to be in the IRA.
Well, there is that. I mean, the thing is...
I think if she said it would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Well, wouldn't it just? I mean, but the thing we often forget about Stormont is that the Deputy First Minister has the same power as the First Minister. So, you know, we've got... The DUP are there as well, and, you know, I wouldn't support them either. But I think it is good that we have power sharing up and running again, so that we get, those things sorted out that need to be sorted out in the country.
Right. You mean in terms of hospitals and government and all that kind of
stuff? Basic governance,
absolutely.
right?
And they've gone in on day one, and she's, as you said, dialed it down. She's speaking in these very sort of appropriate, grown-up, quiet sort of terms. Nothing. She's not going in and shooting guns and going, "There you go, we're in now, woo!"
No.
She's not celebrating too hard.
You're not, of course, suggesting any kind of militaristic connections with Michelle. No, that was it was a metaphor.
It was a metaphor.
Like a cowboy, really.
Exactly, that's it. But of course, in the background, there's people saying, "Oh, not in our name," you know, and they saying it will be never. No.
Can we please not attempt accents on the show?
I thought it was fantastic.
Do you know what? My mother watches this. She's going to be really upset. It's only well, OK.
No.
Right. Anyway, let's move on to another question now. Sorry, Mum, if you heard that. You don't sound like that. Right. A question from Luca. Luca.
Hello. My question is, should we hire people that are dismissive of diversity?
Good question, Luke. You probably all saw this, didn't you? This Telegraph report. BBC staffers, they've been told not to hire candidates who are dismissive of diversity and inclusion policies. Now, I think there's a lot of confusion about this, isn't there? Because, well, you know, you wouldn't want someone working for you who's like, well, I'm only going to work with white people, I'm only going to work with straight people, because that's some kind of idiot who you could do without. That's not what's going on here, is it? It's not what's going on. Diversity and inclusion policies actually mean the opposite of that,
yes.
don't they? What they mean is you've all got to think the same way. You've all got to have the same opinions, and that's really bad for any corporation, particularly, I would suggest, the national broadcaster.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very poor for people with conservative ideas, isn't it? Which is sort of roughly half the country. So,
yeah,
slightly more, actually. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely over this DEI obsession.
Yeah.
And I think it's starting to crumble, isn't it? People are starting to see it for what it is. It's patronising to the people it's supposed to help. It undermines their contributions to everything.
Yeah.
I like to think its days are numbered.
Yeah, it might be. Do you think so, Paul? Are you optimistic?
Well, being dismissive of diversity is what got me the job here, Andrew, as you are.
Right. You are the people's gammon.
Yeah, I am the people's gammon.
Yes.
I'm growing into my role steadily. Sausage roll by sausage roll. But no, you hit the nail on the head. People aren't interested in... These particular people aren't interested in diversity because they're not interested in diversity of thought or opinion or anything other than, like what you say, whatever the doctrine is. You must have 3 of these, 4 of them and 8 of them, and you must think this, and they should have one of those.
Yeah, it's a really bad situation, but I think things are moving in the right direction ever since actually the Penn State and the Harvard.
Yeah, because didn't that expose it? I mean, how can you not answer those questions?
Yeah, unbelievable. If someone says, "Is it OK to call for the genocide of Jews?" your answer is no. Very straightforward, I would have thought. Anyway, let's move on to a question from Catherine. Hi, Catherine. Hello.
So is rolling your eyes a microaggression?
Yes, and I saw you do it earlier. I'm absolutely livid. Were you flirting?
Got it all wrong.
Need to work on the flirting, Catherine. You can start by not flirting with gay men. Well, look. This is a report in the Times. Apparently, civil servants have been told that eye rolling. It sounds like I'm making it up. Eye rolling or looking at their phones can be construed as sexual or racial discrimination. Can it, Cressida?
I'd like to think it's at least a medium-sized aggression when I do it.
You're very theatrical, though, aren't you? You do.
A full head thrust.
yeah, that's very good, Paul, yeah.
Sorry,
if I roll my eyes, it's because I want you to know about it.
What is going on with the civil servant?
I mean, really, they're saying don't do microaggressions, aren't they? They're saying play nicely. I think it's very...
But microaggressions, it's kind of meaningless because it's the way that people interpret other things. It doesn't... You know, this shouldn't be going on in the civil service because it's a sign that it's not impartial, that it is taking a particular ideological line.
But it's probably the only place it is going on in because who cares for it, really?
Well,
who does care for it? I mean, you can't identify, which makes it great for them because anybody can be accused. Because you can... I mean, you know, it could be sort of going on in the background, subconscious, so you can just be accused of it without even knowing yourself, which is ridiculous.
I mean, I would say looking at your phones can be quite rude sometimes, especially if you're having a conversation.
Get it out now.
But you know what I mean? Like, in the middle of a meeting or something. That's actually just etiquette, though, I think, rather than microaggression.
Yeah, microaggression sounds like you pre-planned it.
Yeah.
No, like premeditated microaggression.
It just sounds made up. It makes me think... For some reason, I always think of micro-pigs. You know those really small pigs?
They're much cuter than microaggressions.
There's no way to talk about my children.
Poor Cox, you said it. I didn't say it. So if Paul's children are watching, I apologise for that little comment. Anyway, baby gammons. OK, I'm going to put a stop to this. But next on Free Speech Nation, I've got transgender teacher and journalist Debbie Hayton. Please do not go anywhere.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight in the big story, as a Tory MP steps down because of death threats over his Israel stance, has Suella Braverman been proved right that multiculturalism has failed? In my take at 10, a convicted criminal and illegal immigrant suspected of a chemical attack is still on the run. Proof, if you needed it, that Britain's asylum system is utterly broken. Plus, Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Anne Widdecombe and tomorrow's papers. We're live at 9.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Debbie Hayton was a married man with 3 children before undergoing gender reassignment surgery in 2016. Initially a trans activist, Debbie began to question the gender identity orthodoxy and has therefore been targeted for criticism by the trans community. And now Debbie's written a memoir. There it is on the screen, Transsexual Apostate, My Journey Back to Reality. And I'm delighted to say that Debbie Hayton joins me now. Welcome to the show. And congratulations on the book. A fantastic review in The Telegraph the other day. It's all going very well, isn't it? The book is called Transsexual Apostate. Why not transgender apostate? That's the word that most people use, isn't it?
I think it is, but transsexual links with sex. And we know what sex is. Sex is real, sex is meaningful. I really don't know what gender means.
Well, I think from my understanding, many people say that they have an innate gendered identity. Helen Joyce compares it to like a sexed soul, and that there are people who say that that is just misaligned with their body. Do you think they're just wrong about that? I think that is. I think the idea of gender identity is wrong, and I explain that in the book. I go through what gender identity is, where it came from. It was just this idea that somebody had, and I point out that I can be transsexual. I can go through gender reassignment surgery, and I can explain all that without a gender identity. And if I don't need a gender identity, nobody needs one. Because a lot of people talk about trans, and I think there's a lot of confusion about what exactly does that mean. And a lot of people, I think, are thinking in terms of transsexual, as in someone who has to go through this procedure for whatever reason in order to be comfortable in life. And a lot of people have sympathy with those kinds of people. But now, because of self-identification, the meanings become blurred.
Well, yes, we had this idea that a transsexual was somebody who went through a meaningful transition, and that meant that they were routinely perceived to be a member of the opposite sex. They looked like a member of the opposite sex, more often taken for a member of the opposite sex. But then this idea of self-ID came along, which said that any man can self-declare himself to be a woman, and that's fine. And one of the reasons I got into the activism was partly the impact it has on women's rights, which we can see, and the impact it's having on children, which is desperate, but also what the impact it has on transsexuals.
Yeah, well, can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I've heard you say before that you think a lot of this activism has been really bad for trans people.
Well, it has. We were in a situation about 7, 8 years ago when transsexuals could transition. They could take hormone therapy, go through surgery, and then be accepted in the same way that members of the opposite sex are accepted. But that's something major, is that? That's massive, is that, to ask people to do that. But people did.
Yes.
And then along come these campaigners saying, oh, well, we should just open this up to everybody.
Yes.
Anybody can self-declare to be a member of the opposite sex, and that's fine. And then the pushback which we have seen in recent years and recent months was so obvious this was going to happen. I could see it happening in 2016.
Yes.
And I wrote about it in the book.
So you identify as trans, but you will admit that you are biologically male.
Well, yeah, and I have that T-shirt, trans women and men, get over it, you know, which caused a bit of fuss a few years ago.
I'm sure it did, yeah, absolutely. It's in your book, of course, you talk about the transitional process. This is you're opening up a great deal, you're revealing an awful lot. Isn't it quite difficult to write something like that, so personal?
It was, and my editor said he couldn't read it without crossing his legs that bit.
OK.
So, yes, it was, but... And it's things that, when I was growing up, there was things I've said about my childhood in the book, which I thought I would never, ever be able to admit to anybody.
Yeah.
But if you don't say these things, then things are just lost. And I think it's important to actually explain what it feels like to go through this.
Because your story is very unique insofar as you say, you're speaking openly about something that very few people do. And one of the things that you write about is autogynephilia. Do you want to explain what that is and how that relates to you?
Well, autogynephilia is defined as being sexually and romantically attracted to your own body. Men can be attracted to all sorts of things.
I know.
Men can be attracted to women's bodies, they can be attracted to men's bodies, they can be attracted to inanimate objects. Some of us are attracted to our own bodies. But because we're heterosexual, we're attracted to female traits. So you're sexually and romantically attracted to a lamentably male body. And that's the circle that can't be squared.
I mean, that's very interesting because we don't hear about this very much. How common do you think this is among biological males who identify as females?
Well, how common are these feelings? There was a survey done by Ken Zucker and a Swedish survey a few years ago which suggested that around 2 to 3% of men had had at least one cross-dressing fantasy. Right. You know, this isn't uncommon.
Yes.
Agoniants will say that this is a common theme. Among male to female transsexuals, it's been said probably most.
Yes.
Probably most. Otherwise, you've got to say, why do people do this? Why do people go through all this surgery, this hormone, turn their lives upside down?
Yes.
And the explanation which I'm coming up with, it's down to the male sex drive, the most powerful force known to man.
And of course, the male sex drive is one of the reasons why so many women are concerned about men identifying into their spaces. I mean, how important do you think that is for women to have their own spaces?
I think it's vital. I think women should be able to say this space is for biological women, and we should respect that.
So what toilets would you use, for instance?
I tend to find out where the single-use cubicles are.
Yes.
GBNews is great for me.
I know we're very woke here.
I know not everybody appreciates those toilets.
I'm fully aware of that as well, yes.
But if there's coffee shops in town, I know which coffee shops have got the single-use toilet, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
So it's not difficult. It's not difficult to make this work.
Yes.
But women should expect to have biological spaces and those not to be compromised.
Yes, because there's been a lot of chat online since the book was announced about a teachers' union safeguarding policy that you were involved with drafting, and the complaint seems to relate to the idea of biological males using women's toilets. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think this goes back about 7 years when my union was developing some guidance, and I assisted with that, and my case study's in there.
Yes.
So I assisted with things. I wrote some things. I commented on other things, and then it went off, and then it was published. But I'm just a member of that union, so it's inappropriate for me to comment on my own union's publications.
What about the issue of pronouns? I mean, a lot of feminists are concerned about the idea that we're all meant to announce our pronouns now, but not just feminists. I think generally it's seen as an odd thing. Where do you stand on the pronoun issue?
Pronouns belong to the person using them, and they're a descriptive tool to describe somebody. So if I was describing you, I would say he, because that's what people understand. When people think he, it matches with you. So, but pronouns are there to be used by the person using them, not the person being described. So I'm not somebody who would wear a pronoun badge that said my pronouns are he, him, she, her, whatever. My pronouns are I, me. That's my pronouns.
So how do you feel when people refer to you as he?
It doesn't bother me at all. If they're the pronouns people use for me, that's fine. Human beings, you know, these are pronouns we use for human beings, and don't care too much for it. You know, I don't like that.
No.
But he, she, it doesn't bother me at all. But this compulsion of language is going on, and it's actually now coming from the other side, demanding that I announce that my pronouns are he, him. Well, I've never gone out and demanded that my pronouns are she, her. So I'm not going to do this either.
Very interesting. And I've spoken on this show quite a lot about the way in which when you have one of those appalling crimes where a trans-identified male commits a rape or a sexual abuse of a child or something, and the media will call this person a woman and say she and her when they don't need to do that. And it does confuse the issue, I think. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong. You're absolutely right. A rapist is a man. Only men have the tools to commit rape.
Yes.
And I think it just confuses the issue. Pronouns should be there to help, not confuse.
And, of course, most people do use pronouns according to biological sex. That's how it's used.
Yeah, and because we use pronouns according to how we perceive people, and we tend to perceive their biological sex. We're really good as human beings in perceiving biological sex.
Yes, of course. So in the book, you go right back to childhood, and you're really opening up, and you're telling us your whole life story. Is there any... When did you first sort of have this inkling about yourself that you were... well, I don't want to say the word different, but I think unusual is a fair term, isn't it?
Unusual, yes. The first example I gave was when I was learning to count. And there was the word 80, and I knew I was going to get there because somebody was teaching me to count. And just like that, it was like tights, which was a clothing that girls wore, and I didn't. And I remember it cutting through me at the time, and it's one of those early memories that stuck with me. And it's helpful because it just tells me that this goes way back. This is baked in, you know, these ideas.
Yeah, and you use this metaphor of keeping a beach ball underwater and it keep, you know, coming back to the surface. So it's something that's in you, and it's something that compels you and drives you, but you can't repress it forever, I suppose, is the point.
Well, I think possibly I could have done. You know, I'd become very good at repressing this, keeping this down and out of view. But it was the dawn of the internet. This is the problem.
Yes.
When you start coming across on the internet about other people like me who are transitioning.
Yes.
And the feeling that if they can do this thing I've always wanted to do but think it's not for me, if they can do this, then I want to do this too. And that feeling of jealousy and envy was what pushed me over the edge.
But when you're talking about the origin of these feelings when it regards yourself, I mean, this mustn't make you very popular with trans people who are talking about how they have a gender identity, this is a thing that exists, and they would say that you are denying their existence. I mean, that's the kind of language we're
I'm denying gender identity. I think it's nonsense. But it's much easier to go out and insist that I'm a woman who's had the misfortune of being born in a male body. That's an easy story to sell. To say that I'm a man who happens to be sexually attracted to my own body, so I changed it to make it consistent with what I'm sexually attracted to. That's harder to sell to the public.
So what about when it comes to schools, for instance? I mean, you're a teacher, so you know, and you're a science teacher, so presumably biology is hugely important.
Yeah.
But we have seen examples of gender identity ideology being taught to children, not just that it's a theory, but that it's an absolute fact. Does that put you, as a teacher who doesn't believe in gender identity, in any kind of disadvantage?
Well, I'm a physics teacher, I'm a science teacher,
Yes.
so my job is to teach electrical circuits, Newton's laws of motions, and I try to stick with that.
Yes, but if you were asked, what would you do? If you were asked about gender identity by a school kid? I often think about this because I used to be a school teacher.
Right. I would say something like, well, let's have a look at the policy here which we're to talk about and refer back to that. I do have a job to do. I'm a teacher working in school under the direction of a head teacher.
OK. Well, when is the book out? I think it's quite soon, isn't it?
The book is out on Thursday.
That's very exciting. So people can pre-order it?
They can pre-order now from all the usual places.
Yes. Well, Debbie, thank you ever so much for writing the book, and thank you ever so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you.
And next on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be discussing a football fan who's been banned from attending matches until 2026 due to social media posts criticising gender ideology. I'm going to be speaking to the writer Helen Joyce about that, so please do not go anywhere.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. And later in the show, I'm going to be turning agony uncle with the help of my wonderful panel, Cressida Wetton and Paul Cox. We're going to help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. I know you've all got problems. You wouldn't be watching otherwise. So please email us at gbviews@gbnews.com. We're going to do our best to answer those problems. Now, Newcastle United fan Lindsay Smith has been banned from attending matches until 2026 due to social media posts which criticised transgender ideology. Newcastle say she has breached breached the equality and diversity section of its membership rules, which state that the club will protect supporters from discrimination, harassment and victimisation. They say she's also breached its equality policy, which is similarly worded, and Section 12 of its ground regulations, which prohibit, quote, any conduct, act or statement that is discriminatory, including by means of sexual or gender orientation. Now, one of the tweets posted by Smith, which led to a Premier League investigation, read, "You realise that trans ideology is based off a Nazi, right?" So, here to discuss this, I am joined by the author and director of advocacy at Sex Matters, Helen Joyce. Helen, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure to see you. This is an odd one, isn't it? Because it looks very much as though the Premier League has a spy unit. What's going on?
I think it's worse than odd. It's actually one of the most sinister things I've seen in the 5+ years that I've been following the gross overreaches of transgender ideology. So this woman expresses, you know, in a somewhat casual and careless way, possibly, but free speech isn't about, you know, your most polished thoughts or speaking perfectly. It's about covering everything that you say, on her own Twitter account, has never done anything, which Newcastle admits, has never done anything at all in the grounds or to anybody related to the club or anything like that. They have no actual evidence of anything discriminatory. They passed this secret dossier to the police. The police came around and interviewed her under caution and said 2 hours later there had been no crime. So they decided anyway that they would suspend her. So I actually think it's they who are discriminating against her. I think they're the bigots, not her.
Well, it's very sinister because, from what I understand, they have pictures of her walking her dog. They've tracked her home address. They know her date of birth. I mean, this sounds like the Stasi, doesn't it?
Is they've taken powers that they were given to try to stop the worst sort of football hooliganism, which does require you to work out who the gang leaders are and whether they're coming to your grounds, and maybe even to have barring orders, keeping them out of a city or away from grounds. And somebody, some little tin pot totalitarian somewhere, has thought that that's a great tool that they can use against anyone they disagree with to intimidate. As criminologists say, the process is the punishment. So this woman who has done nothing wrong, nothing at all wrong, whether you agree with what she said or not, that's not the point. The point is she's perfectly entitled to say it. Here they are using this tool against her.
And, of course, this is the sort of thing that a lot of people have been saying for a long time, that some of these laws, for instance, the deplatforming rules on university campuses, which were about fascists, are now being weaponised against feminists. And that's, of course, what a lot of people in Ireland are saying about the hate speech laws, that they will be weaponised eventually against holding this particular view. What is it about the views that Lindsay Smith holds, and people like yourself hold, that lead to these kind of this kind of weaponisation?
I think the point is that the people who disagree with us hold a belief that requires them to force everybody else to play along. If you think that you're a man who's really a woman, that's not something you can pretend all on your very own. You need women to pretend it as well, and you need to force women to let you into spaces where women don't want you. So it is by its nature an imposition on other people, and that requires you to try to silence those other people when they say so. So what Lindsay Smith is saying is very inconvenient for any man who wants to force women to treat him as a woman. And that's why she has to be silenced.
Now, it's very interesting that you talk about how the club are the ones who are really guilty of discrimination. I was under the impression that since the for-starter ruling, the idea that there are two biological sexes and the belief that there are two biological sexes that are immutable is protected in law under the Equality Act. Am I wrong about this?
No, you're not wrong at all. And there have been a bunch of employment tribunal cases and other legal actions since that have demonstrated again and again that that is the case. So there's now a substantial body of case law that not only can you believe this, which, by the way, is the truth, but you can also say it. You can manifest it. I think the nearest legal analogy is probably Joe Cherry, MSP MP, who was dropped by an Edinburgh venue called The Stand because the staff said she was a bigot for being a lesbian who believes that lesbians are women who like women, not women who like men who say they're women. And they said they wouldn't work there. So she got a very eminent KC's legal opinion, and The Stand backed down and let her show go ahead. I really think Newcastle has got the wrong end of the stick here, and I look forward to seeing what happens next.
So do you think this might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you like? And so far as a lot of people have been seeing this and thinking, how can this really be going on? Might this be the thing that finally turns the tide?
No, I think it's going to take a lot longer. If you look back at previous occasions where the law started to clamp down on bigotry, because let's face it, this is what Newcastle is being. It's being bigoted. For example, when they brought in the Race Relations Act or they brought in the Sex Discrimination Act, it took approximately 10 years for employers and service providers to understand that they actually couldn't discriminate against people on the grounds of race or sex. I'm very worried it's going to take us about 10 years to get employers to understand, employers and service providers to understand that they can't discriminate on the grounds of believing in the reality and immutability of the two sexes.
Now, perhaps, Helen, just to give the other side, there was one fan, a Newcastle fan, who complained about Smith specifically and said, this is a quotation, "If I were trans, I would feel extremely unsafe had I to share a space with someone so openly transphobic. Many of her tweets revolve around the LGB movement, a trans exclusionary and discriminatory movement for members of the lesbian, gay and bisexual community to deliberately exclude and aim to discourage and discriminate against the transgender community." What do you make of that kind of complaint?
I can imagine that some trans people might feel unsafe because they've been told that people who disagree with trans ideology are hateful. It's as if you told everybody who believed in Christianity or everyone who believed in Hinduism that the entire rest of the world was out to get them, and then introduced them to somebody who wasn't from their religion. They might feel scared. I have no animus towards trans people. I just don't think that people can change sex. So I blame that sort of fearful reaction on the people who lie about other people's beliefs, like Newcastle United.
And that's a really key point, isn't it? Because we've seen this bizarre hostility towards, people like yourself and also J.K. Rowling and anyone who stands up for women's sex-based rights. But what do we do when this idea of just dismissing people as transphobic and hateful simply for holding these beliefs is so prevalent?
Well, as I say, I mean, racist and sexist beliefs used to be more prevalent than they are now. I mean, we just keep having to fight back, and these bigoted people are really going to have to step in line. It will take them time. It will take more employment tribunal losses. It'll take more legal actions like Joe Cherry's. But eventually HR departments will get the message that if you behave like this, you're going to lose in court and it's going to cost you a lot of money. But just more generally, remember, most people agree with me. Most people don't realise what the trans movement is demanding. They don't realise that it's demanding that they personally lie and give up their rights. So once everybody realises that, the great majority of people who know perfectly well that sex is real won't stand for it. I really don't think so.
Well, very interesting. Helen Joyce, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much. Next on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be joined by Fraser Myers from Spiked. We're going to be discussing the far-right activist found guilty of inciting racial hatred because he ran an online library of downloadable anti-immigration stickers. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Just to add that we are hoping to hear from Newcastle or the Premier League regarding our last story. They have been approached for comment. We'll report back to you next Sunday. A far-right activist called Samuel Melia has been found guilty of inciting racial hatred by running an online library of downloadable anti-immigration stickers. He was found guilty at Leeds Crown Court of encouraging racially aggravated criminal damage and will be sentenced on March the 1st. Melia was the head of a group responsible for the downloading of stickers, putting them up in the local area, which prosecutors said was intended to stir up racial hatred. Melia claimed the so-called practice of stickering was prevalent and it did not occur to him that it might be criminal. So here's to discuss this, the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. So, Fraser, so this guy, Samuel Melia, he had a poster of Adolf Hitler in his house. Yeah. He put out stickers talking about, well, I suppose they were white nationalist stickers, weren't they?
Yeah, some very, quite hateful and grotesque messages on there saying things like Labour loves Muslim rape gangs, mass immigration is white genocide, telling people to go home if they're fourth, fifth generation blacks. So, this is not a nice person, and he certainly has a very not nice message.
But isn't this the issue with free speech, that even people who we don't consider very nice are allowed their free speech?
Absolutely. That is the test of free speech. If you don't defend the freedom for the thought you hate, then you don't really believe in free speech at all. You're talking about me speech, not free speech. And actually, it's been our failure to defend a lot of these hard cases, the racists, the bigots, the scumbags, that has allowed censorship to spread in the way that it has, because I'm sure people watching this show will be familiar with the fact that you do not need to be, a racist or a far-right activist to have your collar felt by the police these days. You can simply believe that, say, women don't have penises.
But, I mean, also, in terms of this case, I mean, I found it very confusing. I wasn't aware that having a poster of Adolf Hitler was illegal, or having a book by, what did he have?
He had a book by Oswald Mosley.
Well, that's not illegal either.
It's not illegal, but it was used to bolster the case that this was a far-right individual. It was a very strange case because the prosecutor said, and I thought this is an Orwellian thing to say, they said, we're not going after you for your political beliefs. But the case hinged on his political beliefs and, of course, on the things that he was saying. Not only was it the message that he was saying, but it was also the fact he was charged with racially aggravated criminal damage. Now, the implication was that not only, he had put up a few stickers, but that other people could download his stickers and they could therefore also be committing criminal damage.
Wait, well, so isn't that saying that it's about criminal damage that might happen in the future based on something you've done?
Yes, that you could be encouraging it by simply printing out stickers. Now, again, that has all kinds of horrifying implications. If you go to any political protest, people will give out stickers for you to probably put up on your way home. That's quite a normal form of political protest.
Yes.
And he isn't the first to get in trouble with the law for stickering. A couple of years ago, police in Merseyside, said they were looking for feminists who had put up stickers saying your women don't have penises. There's a woman at the moment in a battle with Fulham and Hammersmith Council who's been given what's called a community protection notice. It's like a kind of modern form of ASBO because she put up stickers on her own front door.
Yes.
And she's been told, and she doesn't want to remove them. So stickers are become the unlikely new grounds or new battleground for free speech.
Yes, so what does this kind of ruling, I mean, what kind of precedent does this set? Isn't this quite worrying?
I think it's deeply worrying. Any ruling that says, you're not allowed to say X, Y, Z, anything, no matter how harsh or horrible the message might be, you know, sends a deeply troubling message. It sends, you know, to the next cases that actually the net can only get wider, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and we've discussed on this show before the woman who went to prison for anti-Semitic satirical songs.
Yeah.
For instance, Alison Chablos, I think her name was.
Yeah.
And we've also discussed the Grenfell, the mock-up which was burnt in the back garden, which, you know, as a sick joke.
Yeah.
These things aren't nice.
No.
These things aren't pleasant. But once we start criminalising it, it's a dark path.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you criminalise speech, if you criminalise nasty speech in particular, you only push it underground. What you need to defeat these ideas, to defeat racism, is to have arguments about them in public. You want to be able to discredit these people and their ideas. That becomes more difficult with censorship, not less difficult. And you gave the example of Alison Chablos. She wrote these songs that are denying the Holocaust. Now, this was particularly interesting because we don't have a law against Holocaust denial in this country, and yet she was prosecuted under malicious communication laws. You know, you see lots of places in Europe where Holocaust denial is banned. They have a much bigger problem with Holocaust denial than we do because, again, it's spread underground, it's not said out in the open, and so people don't hear the rebuttals. They speak among themselves, but they don't actually hear the rebuttals.
Very interesting example. I wanted to raise another issue that came up this week in the courts, which was the Laurence Fox situation. Now, you know what's happened here. Could perhaps give us a bit of a précis?
Yeah, so this is another troubling case where Laurence Fox has successfully been sued for libel because, essentially, for a rhetorical flourish. I mean, again, this is not big or clever. This is not Jonathan Swift-level satire. But he responded to people calling him racist by calling them paedophiles.
Yes.
Basically, his argument was that, you know, if you're going to call me a racist with no grounds, I'll call you a paedophile. I'm as much a racist as you are a paedophile.
Yes.
And the judge took the extraordinary view that because he couldn't prove that they were paedophiles, which is not something he'd set out to do, that he was committing libel, that he was defaming them, and that there could be no defence for his case.
So, look, I find that very disturbing, and the reason is that it was perfectly obvious the point he was trying to make.
Yeah.
He's making the point that you can't just throw around unfounded, very serious accusations, and therefore he was going to replicate the point right back at them. It needn't have been paedophile. He could have said anything, or you sleep with goats, or whatever, you know.
Exactly, and to even ram home that point, he actually used the exact same wording as one of his accusers had used against him.
Yes.
You know, she said that he was, you know, publicly and obviously, and so, you know, a racist, and he used the exact same thing back at her. So it's obvious to everyone, apart from High Court judges, apparently.
OK, so that's the problem, isn't it? Because if it is obvious to everyone, how do we get this ruling? Because it would suggest that the High Court judge, in this particular case, does not understand what absolutely everyone clearly understands. It's not possible, I think, to interpret it in the way the judge is saying it's possible.
I think there is just an extreme literal-mindedness often when, you know, when these cases come to court and they're removed from the context, you know, out of the rough and tumble of Twitter and the internet. It's not a nice place. People are rude to each other. And then you read these things out in the courtroom in the cold light of day. They sound a bit different.
Yes.
But it's often something that happens. There was another troubling aspect to the case as well. So Laurence Fox countersued his accusers, saying, you know, you've defamed me by calling me racist. And they said that's not even something they could rule on. They didn't say you're right to call him racist, so it's not defamation. They said, well, we can't judge that. It can't be libelous. So essentially, you have a green light potentially to call people racist, to defame them as racist, but you can't defame them as a paedophile. I'm not entirely sure how that is going to work going forward.
So if this had been reversed and they'd called him a paedophile and he called them a racist, then what would the ruling have been then?
Presumably the ruling would have been completely the other way around. But then again, you know, would they have ruled in Laurence Fox's favour is another question.
Well, look, I mean, I'm not denying the sincerity of the judge or anyone involved in the procedure. I just find it baffling that you can't see what is obviously a satirical statement.
And this is the problem with the UK's libel laws. Actually, in the US, the First Amendment explicitly defends, you know, hyperbole, extreme rhetoric, and Supreme Court justices have made the point that actually that adds to national life, the fact that people can make extreme statements that everyone knows are not true in order to ram home a point. That's just classic rhetoric. That's how people make it.
But the problem we now have is people are going to start using the term racist with more, and it's already being used so promiscuously it doesn't mean anything.
Absolutely, it's lost all meaning. You know, everyone is now called a racist. You know, people who voted for Brexit are called a racist, whereas actually, you know, it's a word that should be used for the types of people like Sam Mellier, who is, you know, calling for Black Britons to be deported.
Right.
That's who it should be reserved for, but it's now lost its currency.
Very troubling stuff, Fraser, but thanks ever so much for coming to talk to us about it.
Thank you.
So there is plenty more to come tonight on Free Speech Nation, including news of a series of talks and debates which are designed to promote free speech in universities. And we're also going to be talking about details of the Crown Prosecution Service and how it's been having secret meetings with Stonewall, Mermaids and other lobbying groups. Plus, of course, some social sensations and more questions from our audience. Don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. If you remember what weather conditions you had on Sunday, you'll probably see very similar conditions on Monday as we start off the new week. Systems are very slow moving at the moment, high pressure situated towards the south, but this weather front has become stalled across areas of Scotland and will provide very persistent rainfall across particularly western districts, the Highlands, Argyll and Bute as we head throughout the night. A rain warning is enforced and some flooding and disruption is possible. Elsewhere, a reasonably cloudy night. There's some clearer spells developing through central areas at times. Mild for all of us though, temperatures not dropping much lower than 9 or 7 degrees Celsius. A chillier start to the new week for the far north of Scotland though, with a touch of frost. And as this rain band just pushes ever so slightly northwards into the cold air ahead of it, we could see a touch of snow for the likes of Caithness, Sutherland, even to lower levels for a time. But that rain will really be persistent across western areas and it's going to provide a very miserable and wet day here. Again, relatively blustery and cloudy for most other areas, some patches of drizzle to watch out for, mist and murk around coastal districts. Temperatures are touched down compared to the weekend, around 9 to 12 degrees Celsius. On Tuesday, that rain band will eventually push its way slightly further southward, so moving into Northern Ireland, Northern England, a bit of mountain snow possible here as well. To the south, you hold on to that mild, cloudy, blustery theme, but to the north, we open up the doors to something a touch brighter, with some snow showers, but also colder. And those colder conditions are slowly going to push their way across other areas of the UK throughout the forthcoming week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
There's plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation this week. We're going to be meeting two organisers of a group who promote free speech at universities. And also, we're going to be learning how the Crown Prosecution Service consulted with mermaids and Stonewall before adopting a controversial stance on sex by deception prosecutions. Plus, some more questions from this wonderful studio audience. But first, let's get a news update from Ray Addison.
Good evening. Your top stories tonight. The police watchdog has launched an investigation following a crash on the M25, which happened after a police pursuit. Officers from Hertfordshire Constabulary were following a van at around 4 a.m, but they were stood down before the collision. The van went on to hit 3 other vehicles and a woman was killed. Police say her family is being supported by specially trained officers. Now, a £20,000 reward is being offered for information that may lead to the arrest of a suspected chemical attacker. New video has been released of Abdul Azadi in a Tesco store in North London on Wednesday. Police say his last known movements show he left Tower Hill tube station in the East End just after 9:30 that evening. That was after a woman who was known to Azadi and her 2 children were attacked. Forensic tests have shown that a concentrated corrosive substance was used, either liquid sodium hydroxide or carbonate. The Houthis have been urged to stop their reckless attacks on shipping in the Red Sea following the latest UK-US airstrikes in Yemen. Lord Cameron says the rebel group, which is backed by Iran, has been given repeated warnings to end its campaign, which he says threatens the freedom of navigation and puts innocent lives at risk. 36 sites across 13 locations in Yemen were targeted by coalition forces. A 17-year-old boy has become the 4th person to be charged with the murders of 2 teenagers in Bristol. 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon was stabbed in the Knowle West area last weekend. A 44-year-old man and 2 youths, aged 15 and 16, have already been charged with their murders. A man's been arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences following the death of a woman in Essex. 68-year-old Esther Martin was reportedly visiting her 11-year-old grandson when she was attacked in Jaywick. The 2 dogs, thought to be XL bullies, were destroyed. Experts are yet to confirm their breed, though. The 39-year-old man remains in custody. Former Wales and British and Irish Lions fly half Barry John has died, aged 79. He played in 5 Lions tests and was nicknamed the King after inspiring their 1971 victory over the All Blacks. His family says he'll be remembered as a loving granddad to his 11 grandchildren. And the King has been seen in public for the first time since leaving hospital. He was spotted smiling and waving at a crowd gathered at St Mary Magdalene Church in Sandringham. King Charles was discharged from hospital last Monday after being treated for an enlarged prostate. Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now let's get straight back to Free Speech Nation.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Let's get some more questions from our wonderful studio audience. Our first question comes from Victor.
Should dead people be able to change gender?
Victor is slightly mad. Actually, no, it's the Labour MP, Charlotte Nichols, has asked if the Gender Recognition Act could be edited to allow transgender people who are deceased to be legally remembered by the gender they live by. Thoughts, Cressida?
Well, obviously this is sparked because of Brianna Jai's murder, and I think the idea is that because she was underage when she died, she wasn't able to change her gender But in years to come, clearly that's how her family will remember her, as a girl, not a boy. But I don't think that necessarily means that we should make this change, because then we're getting closer to self-ID and all the problems that that brings.
Well, of course. I mean, particularly if someone's dead. I mean, what's going to happen if this goes through?
Even Shakira said the hips don't lie. And when they look at the hips, when that body's in the ground, in years to come, they are going to be able to identify the gender of that body.
I did not expect you to quote Shakira.
You've got to quote Shakira occasionally. and I think that's ultimately the problem, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
It's words. It will mean something to the family. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But in terms of anatomy and biology, things aren't going to change.
OK, well, let's get another question from Jeremy. Do we have a Jeremy here? Hi, Jeremy.
Hi. Should pride pillars appear at stations?
OK, this is an interesting one. This actually went viral this week. You might have seen that Network Rail installed a pride pillar at London Bridge station, and this had lots of flags representing, well, not just the Progress Pride flag, that sort of really ugly monstrosity we've all seen, but also one representing gender fluidity, demisexuality, polyamory, and some commentators argue that the pillar breaches the company's regulations because it's essentially a political poster. And we've even had some protests from feminist groups. Let's have a look. Good voices, right?
Beautiful, yes.
They were actually really good
Very
singers.
good.
You don't expect that at protests. They were harmonising and everything. I mean, for goodness sake.
It was very good. It was very good.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you about that, Krista, because that pillar, I don't know if we've got an image of the pillar, a close-up image of what it looks like.
Yes, I've seen
it's
it.
It's an absolute eyesore. Now, the thing about it, there it is, and the problem with all these flags that are being plastered over this is that it is deeply political. I think a lot of people think that this is just about being nice and just being welcoming. These flags, and particularly the Progress Pride flag, the one at the top with the rainbow colours and then the chevrons, that is now a flag that is associated with a movement that says that gender identity, whatever that means, should supersede biological sex in legislation and society. That, of course, means that women's single-sex spaces are at risk. It means that gay people are at risk, because gay people, when they're young, are being put onto puberty blockers and effectively fixed and heterosexualised. In other words, they think they're being pro-gay. They're actually putting up anti-gay flags in the name of gay rights.
I mean, George Orwell couldn't have written it, could he? It's unbelievable. That kind of, to me, it feels very oppressive, you know, and not just because there's far too many colours and it makes me want to be a minimalist, but that's just my aesthetic taste, you know. No, I mean, and why am I'm trying to catch a train to go somewhere. Why do I have to hear this political message at that point?
What, are they going to put up, like, Che Guevara signs and, you know, communist flags and, you know, or anything like that?
Well, it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, it does wind me up, but also because people blame me and gay people. They say, this is all you're doing. I'm like, I want that stuff taken down. It doesn't represent me.
Well, for me, you are the representative of all gay people in
I like
the
to think
UK,
so.
Andrew.
I like to think so.
I'm sorry to
I'm
hear you
Chief
talk that
Gay.
way. Chief Gay? Is that what you go with?
Yeah, you're Chief Gammon, I'm Chief Gay. We should do a double act, Gammon and Gay.
I'll tell you what, let's do it.
Yeah, well up for that.
But, you know, if there's such a thing as free speech, which, of course, there isn't any longer, I know that sounds facetious, but quite clearly there isn't, you would have a pillar in London Bridge that's got, you know, Millwall on one, Chelsea on the other. Whatever it is, you should be able to... This is not about being kind. This is an indoctrination. This is saying, if you continually see this image, you will believe what this image is telling you.
Yeah.
And you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it until you and I have transitioned and Crester's a boy.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I'm not going to broach it now, but yeah, so what do we do about this? Because I think the big problem here is that so many people in the public think that this is progressive. They think that this very regressive movement that is making things worse for women, worse for gay people, is actually the opposite. How do we get the message across that this isn't what you think it is?
I'm surprised if they do feel like that. I wonder if they aren't getting fed up with it, it's just far, far too much. And to me, it comes with this kind of accusation. We're doing this because you don't have the right ideas yet. You're not progressive.
Yes.
But I think most modern British people do think that they're progressive, don't they? And they'd be quite offended if they thought that they're being accused of being transphobic or homophobic or any other phobic.
Well, I don't know anyone who's homophobic or transphobic.
No,
I don't know where you find these people.
No.
But they have this idea that this is really commonplace. Is it? Or is this just a spectre of people's imagination?
Well, if it's not, then this whole system crumbles for them because they need that fear for it to work. Because if that fear doesn't exist, then there's no need for pillars full of different colours to make you think.
I mean, I have to clarify. I know that people are still attacked for being gay. I know that there are people who are very unpleasant, but they are a tiny, tiny minority. You're always going to get some psychopaths in society. This is not a broad societal problem in the UK. It just isn't.
No, and that's why we got terms like microaggression.
Yeah.
You've literally got to go down to the micro level in order to identify anything. And
it's a supply and demand issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. There'll be nano-aggressions before we know it.
Yeah.
Nobody will know it. You know, there'll be, like, pre-fetal aggression.
Yeah. Well, fetus is often kick in the womb.
Well,
I think that's pretty damn aggressive.
That's domestic violence.
Absolutely outrageous stuff. Cancel the fetuses. Anyway, we're going to have a question now from Adrian. Where's Adrian?
Hi there, back to microaggressions, I'm afraid.
Oh,
Were
here we
the
go.
Clapham attacks all about microaggressions?
You know what? I'm glad you raised this. This was incredible. So the Tory MP Caroline Noakes went on Newsnight, wasn't it? It was Newsnight to talk about the horrific Clapham attacks, the acid attacks, and what happened? She started talking about microaggressions instead. Can we hear part of this discussion? Because it's something else.
With respect, Kirsty, the media, journalists are not interested in microaggressions. They want to hear about the most egregious
I think some of us want to hear about microaggressions.
And the stark reality is that every day women will face misogyny and microaggressions. If you're a woman of colour, it will be worse. And we have to do better at understanding the cultures that make men think that's OK. It's not OK, and actually you can see a pattern of behaviours that lead to really horrific crimes.
So, to be frank, what the hell is she saying there? I mean, she's basically saying that this guy threw acid at these poor people because, I don't know, someone had suffered microaggressions at some point and it escalated. I mean, what is going on?
Well, it's a bit similar, but worse, to when you hear people talking about rape culture, implying that there's this cultural movement towards... I don't really even know what that means, rape culture. And the idea that there's a cultural movement towards that behaviour being acceptable, it's absolute madness.
So this reminds me a bit of the David Amess, horrific murder of David Amess by an Islamist extremist. And as soon as that happened, we had people standing up in Parliament saying, this means we need to tighten up on online hate speech laws. That's the problem here. Nasty tweets was the problem here.
Yeah.
No, it was the psychopath with the knife who had these crazed medieval beliefs, right?
Yes, it's something awful and anomalous, and they want to tell you that it's because of the way... It's almost like self-flagellation. We all need to look at our behaviour, guys.
Yeah, but why won't politicians just address the actual issues here and stop talking about, or stop abusing, I would say, exploiting these horrible tragedies to try and clamp down on everyone else's free speech? That's what's going on here, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, and it makes you feel that if a politician comes along that does say something real, we're all going to be absolutely gobsmacked and so impressed by them, because I sort of feel like I'm used to hearing this kind of tone, and I'm sick of it.
Yeah, well, for an alternative view for balance, let's go to Paul Cox. But you're a big fan of what she said, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I wrote it for her.
Yeah, well done, well done.
She's anti-truth, along with a lot of politicians now, and it's a diversion and a distraction. The reason it is because if they were to say the truth, it would be career-ending for them. And if we see that at the highest level of society, as politicians would have us believe, then that is why it filters down all the way. So if you spoke to her privately, and I have done, I haven't, and I'm sure she would admit that it's got nothing to do with microaggressions. It's got everything to do with culture, but not a microaggression. And she would not say those things privately. However, when she's put in front of a camera, she has no choice but to say those things because they can't deal with the issue.
But does she not have a choice? I mean, that's what I don't understand.
I believe she does. I believe her constituents have given her the right to have that choice, and she's failing them.
Well, look, I'm for free speech. She can go on TV and say whatever she wants, even if it's absolutely nonsensical. But
well, I think that's why we've got GB News, isn't it? That hearing those kind of things, I feel like we're more able here to. Well, we're discussing it now, you know.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely true. But why can't every news channel do that?
I don't understand it.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. OK, well, let's move on to another question from Francesca. Francesca, hi.
Is Elon Musk's brain technology going to save the human race?
Oh, Goodness me. You know, I've spoken about this. I mean, look, I like Elon Musk in certain ways. I like the fact that he's restored free speech to Twitter to a degree. I like the fact that he's having to go at advertisers and saying F you and I don't need your money. All of that is great. I don't like this brain technology stuff. So Elon Musk, well, he's got this idea of transhumanism. He's got this Neuralink division, and he says he's going to successfully implant it into the brain of a human being. And the hope is... Now, look, there are good intentions behind this, because he says the technology could cure paralysis and neurological conditions. That, I think, is great, actually. But he's talking about the end game being what he calls human-AI symbiosis, which he says is species-level important. Did you see the last Terminator film, Cressida?
Obviously.
Yeah. So, you know, in the last Terminator film, how you get this half-human who's been enhanced with robotic technology, and so she can really kick ass. You know, she can sort of fight robots. I get that's kind of cool. But the thing is, I don't want to be half robot.
No, but Elon wants you to be, because he's super, super clever, and he's probably a bit lonely, and he probably wants more super clever people around him. So he's thinking, right, I'll just build them myself.
Well, maybe. I mean, if you have this Neuralink chip, right? So, and if you have this transhumanism idea, I suppose it would mean that as human beings, I would have access to the internet all the time, which would actually be horrible. But I could access all information all the time. But my IQ would be massively exponentially increased.
I saw him on Joe Rogan once, and Joe said, hey, do you think we'll ever be cyborgs? And he picked up his phone and he said, you already use this to think. Which is so true, isn't it? Because if you lose your phone, you can't call an Uber or whatever. It feels like you can't think. So
I suppose that is kind of true.
I think he would argue that we're on the way, you know, but we don't want this to fall into the wrong hands, do we?
Oh, absolutely not. Would you be enhanced with a Neuralink chip? Would you be happy with it?
Me, undoubtedly. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine? This is the bog standard version.
Yeah.
You know,
you'd be super gammon, right? Yeah. You'd be like an armour-plated, robotic cyborg gammon. One of the ones that can sort of melt, like in Terminator 2.
I'd have like a gold-plated sty.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I can imagine that.
That's come out, but after a good nap.
Now, what do you think, seriously? Because I just don't... I'm scared of this technology. I kind of think, don't mess with... Like, mess with whatever you like, OK? But human beings, I think, just leave them alone, yeah?
Many years ago, like Christopher Reeve, when, you know, he was Superman and he fell off a horse and he wasn't Superman anymore, and he could never quite get to the point where the technology would help him.
Sure, I get
So, from that perspective, I can see that what Elon Musk is doing could be helpful. But it's when it becomes this sort of existential human peculiarity stuff that goes on over here, where we go... Because we're already trying... We've got posts with colours on to make us think. Yeah. So we don't need chips as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I say we destroy all robots and computers.
Yes, starting with Lewis Schaefer.
There we go. Yeah, people don't know that Lewis Schaefer is a robot.
Yeah, we made him.
We made him.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, doesn't it just? Absolutely. OK, so next on Free Speech Nation, I'm going to be learning about a series of talks and debates designed to promote free speech in universities over the next couple of months, so please don't go anywhere.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight in the big story, as a Tory MP steps down because of death threats over his Israel stance, has Suella Braverman been proved right that multiculturalism has failed? In my take at 10, a convicted criminal and illegal immigrant suspected of a chemical attack is still on the run. Proof, if you needed it, that Britain's asylum system is utterly broken. Plus, Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Anne Widdecombe and tomorrow's papers. We're live at 9.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This Tuesday, the 6th of February, Ideas Matter, the educational and citizenship charity, launches Living Freedom University Salons. This is an extensive programme of talks and debates which will take place in universities throughout February and March. Living Freedom supports free speech and aims to renew freedom through education and debate. The salons will bring students and academics together to debate all the big issues. So here to tell me more about it, I am joined by the convener of Living Freedom, Alistair Donald, and student at Trinity College Dublin and Living Freedom organiser, Felice Basby. I'm going to come to you first, Alistair. You're the convener of Living Freedom. Do you want to tell us a bit more about it and what you're doing with this tour?
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard endlessly about the problems with free speech in universities. So what we're doing is setting up a series of events where we can put on discussions for students, hopefully academics come as well, where we can talk about controversial issues if need be. We can get everybody along of all political persuasions and viewpoints, put them in a room together and have some fairly open discussions about what it is that we need to talk about in a way that's unfortunately not been the case in universities. Are
there any subjects that you're not going to broach? I mean, there was the case last year of Helen Joyce, who was a guest who was on the show tonight earlier. She turned up at Gonville and Keys College for an event, and the students outside were banging drums, screaming, making noises, intimidating other students so that they couldn't attend. Is that going to happen?
I hope not, and we're not actually discussing transgender stuff in this series, although it has to be said that that particular incident at Cambridge was the thing that motivated the very first of the salons that we did, which we did in Cambridge at that same college.
Yes, I was there.
Which was a response, and you were there, and
yes.
You gave a talk. So we're not shying away from any issues, but we've got a limited number of events, and we've got topics that we've chosen for this series, and we'll come back to that another time.
Now, Felice, you're still a student, so you're in a very good position to let us know how things are. I keep hearing that students are really weak snowflakes. They can't debate anymore. They're not interested in other ideas. My experience has not been that. I've been to a lot of universities and spoken on campus. I actually have found the opposite. So who's right?
Well, I think it's very interesting because we do hear a lot that free speech is under threat on campus, and I think it is true, but I also think you're right that there is actually, once you go there and once you're in university, there's a lot of students who are very interested in debating ideas and on all subjects. So I think, you know, there is a real spirit for something like Living Freedom to bring students together to discuss controversial issues, and, you know, that's what we're trying to do here.
And is that what attracted you to Living Freedom to begin with?
Yes, exactly. So I first heard of Living Freedom as a summer school, which was a weekend in London, and you know, the programme was a brilliant put together of everything I was interested in, and it sort of took me out of the university setting. But this way, you kind of bring that same spirit to the very students that are, you know, going to be debating these things out in public in the future, who need to be robustly able to debate all topics, not just the ones that are sort of acceptable in student debating unions.
Very interesting. Can I ask what topics specifically are you going to be broaching during this tour?
Well, we've always, at the summer school that Felice has mentioned and in these salon events, we've always tried to mix up a little bit of history and a little bit of contemporary discussion. So we're interested in people who've contributed something historically. You did John Milton when you spoke for us. We're going to do people like John Locke, but also slightly more contemporary people, C.L.R. James, for example. We're going to do something on Frederick Douglass, all sorts of people from history.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do also some discussions that are around some of the controversial topics today. So, for example, is the social media, bans on social media going to resolve the problems that we always hear about, hate speech?
Yes.
Stuff like that. So, yeah, a mixture of history and some contemporary discussions. Well.
I mean, that sounds absolutely fantastic. It's really good, this idea of taking it all around the country to various different places. But we do hear also about the NUS, for instance, the Union of Students, and the students who get involved in politics, and that they have a kind of disproportionate voice. And they're the ones who are, I suppose, giving students a bad name and saying we can only have a very narrow avenue of what we're allowed to talk about. Do you think that problem has been exaggerated, Felice?
Definitely. And I think one of the things is that most students aren't interested in student politics at all. You know, voter turnout in student elections are very low. And I think most students are just trying to get on with their engineering degree or various other topics. So this means that those who decide to go into student politics are a very specific sort of character. Yes. And that can sometimes show you this very monolithic view of what student life is like and what students are like. But really, you know, if you go to your lectures, to your tutorials, there's a wide array of voices. And, you know, this is... It's not really as bad as it seems if you look on the Student Union website.
I suppose part of the problem is that the small amount who do go into the student politics have disproportionate clout, don't they? And, you know, when it comes to things like no platforming, for instance, that is a preemptive thing. So we don't really hear about all the people who never get invited because you have this small cluster of students saying, well, don't invite them because they'll cause offence. Do you think offence as a concept is something that students these days are worried about?
I think so. I really think so. But I think it also comes from a good place. And, you know, students are interested in changing the world and making the world a better place. And I don't think that this is a bad thing. I just think that students have kind of come to this, it's sort of an easy way out to ban offensive speech, to make, you know, this all go away by shutting it down. But I think it's really important that students recognise that once they're outside the campus, once they're out in the real world, they are going to encounter, you know, all views, and they'll have to be able to defend themselves against it.
It's interesting, Alistair, that you've chosen to focus the tour on these historical figures. I mean, are you trying to make a particular point about that, taking people back into the past?
Well, no, but I think sometimes people arrive at universities and lots of time in school they've not been able to study some of these historical figures for all sorts of reasons. So I think it's important to come into a university and get a sense that you are part of a historical tradition where freedom and free speech have been very important in the past, to understand some of these people and how their ideas developed and what they said, and I suppose to ask whether they're still important today. I mean, we have a choice as to what to take from the past. It's not necessarily the case that everything in the past continues to be something you want to emphasise, but people need to work through these things and to work it out for themselves. And I think if there's anything about our events that I'd stress, it's that you have to come along and work it out for yourself. It's not a kind of lecture that you write a few notes and you go away afterwards and you've got it. It's kind of a discussion and you need to involve yourself and work it out for yourself.
So critical thinking, in other words, is going to be key.
Yeah,
but it's interesting because I gave a talk at a university, Aberystwyth University, and the students turned up and they were great, but the members of staff of the department who had organised this said they wouldn't promote it because my values would upset them or wouldn't be in accordance with their diversity policy or something like that. So is it really the students or is it the academics with an agenda?
Well, I think sometimes, as Felice has said, there's a noisy section of students that probably shut things down. There's some academics who are not into the spirit of free discussion. But I think quite a lot of the time it's university administrators who are taking offence on students' behalf.
Yeah.
And it's them that are the problem. And we've got a new act, a new Free Speech Act coming in higher education and universities just now, which is going to place a legal duty on universities to protect and promote free speech. And that's, and you know, I know academics who are very pleased about that because they've had a hard time of it. But I think it's important that it doesn't just become yet another administrative thing that you've a box to tick. And I think these events are very much about building a culture of free speech. It's got to be something that resonates with people in universities. They've got to feel that they can involve themselves in debating controversial subjects, not shy away from them, because that's the only way that you really resolve what you think about.
Well, this is all sounding very positive. It sounds to me like intellectual inquiry is still very much alive and well at universities. Would you agree?
I would totally agree. I think one of the things that we really want to do in Dublin is bring this kind of intellectual inquiry where you, in your own subject, maybe for me in history, which I study, I can go into whatever I want. But in Dublin, or in Ireland, we have the hate speech bill coming in. And one of the things we want to do is make sure that students can use that critical thinking that they are learning in their courses. You know, university courses are still very, very good, but bring that to contemporary issues, things that are important to us today, and things that will matter for us.
Fantastic. Well, finally, before you go, can you let us know how can we find out about the various venues, the various events that are going on?
Yeah, you go to Living Freedom website, livingfreedom.org.uk. All the events, which are about 10 of them just now in universities stretching from Exeter in the south to Aberdeen in the north and over to Ireland as well. So look at the website, find out about them and come along and discuss.
And it's starting next week?
Tuesday. In Oxford, Oriel College, Oxford.
Fantastic, great stuff. Well, Alistair and Felice, thanks so much for joining me. Next up on Free Speech Nation, we're going to hear about how the Crown Prosecution Service has potentially been ideologically captured. It's been having meetings in secret with mermaids and Stonewall. Don't go anywhere.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
And why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Now, it was disclosed this week that the Crown Prosecution Service conducted meetings with campaigning groups Mermaids and Stonewall before recommending an approach to sex by deception prosecutions, which would see them all but vanish. The Information Commissioner's Office upheld an appeal against the refusal of the CPS to name who they consulted on the deception as to gender section in the Rape and Serious Sexual Offences Legal Guide. The Information Commissioner said the public interest favoured disclosure of the information. Now, here to explain the significance of this, I'm joined by Dennis Kavanagh, lawyer and director of the Gay Men's Network. Hello, Dennis.
Hi. Hello.
So, firstly, could you explain to us why this consultation is controversial?
It's controversial because what happened was the CPS announced a radically new model policy to the prosecution of sex by deception. If I back up for a moment, sex by deception is a situation where someone lies about their biological sex. These cases are quite unusual, but they're very important and very serious because they often feature people who are very sexually naive.
Young people, that kind of...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Often very young, sometimes people who have specific vulnerabilities that render them naive. And lo and behold, at the end of 2022, we got a consultation through, and I discussed it with you in the past. It's the first CPS consultation I've ever seen in my life that finds reasons not to prosecute. It was extraordinary. It told prosecution staff that gender identity was not only real, but that if a defendant said that they had a gender identity, and the CPS lawyer found it convincing, in the words of the consultation, if they were living as a man, living as a woman, well, then they shouldn't be prosecuted. Even worse, it said you shouldn't prosecute where someone had closed their eyes to the obvious. And when you think that these are vulnerable and naive people, that's victim blaming from the CPS.
Yes.
And now we only know, we were all very, very concerned about this sort of language. These are serious cases. The Court of Appeal has said that they're serious cases. It's said that deceptions as to your biological sex is a serious, serious offence against someone else. It's a serious lie to tell. We thought this had the grubby fingerprints all over it of the extreme gender identity lobby. Yes. At the time, and many of us, when we responded, said we thought the CPS was subject to what's called institutional capture, which is where extreme gender ideologues get in and corrupt a system. Now, a very intrepid Twitter user to whom we're very much indebted to, I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for her hard work, called her Twitter handle is Jill, submitted a Freedom of Information request and pursued this because she asked, CPS said, look, we have met with interested groups. And she simply said, well, you're a public service, freedom of information, who are the interested groups?
Well, this is where it gets interesting, because the Crown Prosecution Service refused to answer that simple question, and they delayed and they delayed and they appealed, and then they were told that the appeal wouldn't stand. They said, but we got there in the end, right?
We did, but only thanks to Jill's tenacity and doggedness. She submitted the Freedom of Information request on the 26th of September of 2022. We've only just had the appeal withdrawn on the 16th of January this year under a new Director of Public Prosecutions, which I suspect had something to do with it. But we learnt quite a lot in this backwards and forwards. One of the most striking things was when the CPS were arguing with the Information Commissioner about whether or not they should have to tell us who they met with, one of the things they said is we shouldn't have to tell you because if these organisations, quote, making their participation public would almost certainly cause an issue for them. This is the CPS saying it would cause them an issue. And then they went, it gets worse. They said they may be obliged to set out their position on the issues in public. So that's the...
Shock horror.
I know, that's the CPS saying to us, or saying to Jill, that a public service shouldn't tell us who they're talking to about the decision about who does and doesn't get prosecuted for rape. It's extraordinary.
I mean, I don't want to read anyone's minds, but it sounds very much like they didn't want us to know that they'd met with these lobby groups.
It does. I mean, you could be forgiven for thinking that, couldn't you? It is extraordinary. They also said we can't name these groups because they'll, quote, be drawn into controversy. This is appalling. the CPS know that these positions are controversial, right?
Yes.
They know that they don't want to defend them in public. And what they're doing is they're running cover for these people. This is outrageous. This is rape prosecution policy, and they're having secret meetings with extremists and then covering from them.
Can you explain to me why, for a consultation on prosecutorial policy regarding rape, you have to talk to a children's charity?
I wish I could answer that question. It's just extraordinary. Mermaids are a very controversial child sex change charity who are now under a safeguarding investigation for very serious allegations. Stonewall have been campaigning to decriminalise sex by deception since Ruth Hunt, the CEO, one but before the last one, yes, was in charge. They also spoke to the Scottish Trans Alliance, despite the fact that this is a prosecution policy for England and Wales. It does rather look like there's a very cosy arrangement here between an elite, both in the public sector, in the CPS, and in the charity sector, who all seem to have one view. And they want to have secret meetings. They want to change prosecution policy, change it so that we have second-class defendants for, as I say, these often very vulnerable, very naive people. They want them to be second-class victims, and they want privileged status for their preferred set of defendants. This is extraordinary, and the new DPP badly needs to get a handle on this. We still have no idea what was said round the table by Stonewall and Mermaids. Now, you compare that, I can tell you, if you want to know what the Gay Men's Network said in this consultation, or Sex Matters, or LGB Alliance, who Mermaids were trying to close down at the time, or Transgender Trend, you can look up all our responses online. Why should these be secret? So I would call upon the new Director of Public Prosecutions, please, to publish and tell us what Stonewall are saying and what Mermaids are saying behind closed doors. We have a right to know. This is a public service.
But don't we already know, insofar as we've seen the Crown Prosecution Service use phrases that imply that gender identity is an indisputable fact, when, of course, it is a quasi-religious belief system. If the Crown Prosecution Service is taking that view, then how can they possibly be considered impartial?
Well, quite. And, you know, when you read the consultation, there is an uncritical adoption of the ideological language of gender. They talk about some people being genderqueer, sex being assigned at birth, the lot. There's even criticism of the fact that you can't get a gender recognition certificate to be non-binary. There's comments in the consultation about gender identity services, healthcare for children, which is way outside what we call RASO, rape and serious sexual offences policy. It's institutional capture. The DPP needs to get a hold of this, because we can't have confidence in an ideologically captured public service that's supposed to be independent. And also, I question how employees of the Crown Prosecution Service, there's plenty of sensible employees, would ever be able to operate this policy, because if you don't believe in gender identity, I don't see how you could.
Isn't this a broader problem, though, because we've seen many cases of the police showing clear signs of institutional capture? If it's in the police, if it's in the courts, if it's in the CPS, then we're in real trouble, aren't we?
We are in real trouble, and, you know, there are good signs. Kemi Badenoch stood on the floor of House of Commons and said Stonewall do not make the law in this country. She's right, but it's worth saying they damn well try to.
Yeah, and they're still in many institutions and corporations misrepresenting the law.
Yeah, completely. Well, the law is entirely misrepresented in this consultation. I won't go into the ins and outs of the Crown against McNally and the law of consent, but I can tell you it is just plain wrong. But the fact of the matter is this. We've got people who couldn't win up in the Court of Appeal. They couldn't influence Parliament. Stonewall, before all of this, said they were going to try and influence MP. They obviously decided that wouldn't work, so they've decided instead to go and subvert the law behind closed doors. And haven't we seen this again and again and again? Didn't we see this where Aqua Reindorf described their behaviour, I think it was Reading University, you correct me if I'm wrong, as trying to get ahead of the law, and the law as they wished it to be.
That was Reading.
That was Reading. It was rather than the law as it was. And I'm sorry, no one voted for Stonewall. If Stonewall don't make the law in this country, as the Secretary of State for Equality said, then it's damn well timed that was the case in terms of the operation of our public services.
So what would you like to see happen now? Would you some sort of statement from the DPP, some sort of investigation, perhaps, something like that?
Well, I'd like to... first, I want to know what on earth is going on with this consultation. It's been kicked into the long grass. We've heard nothing. I want to know know what the CPS policy is. Second, I want to know what on earth is being said to the CPS behind closed doors. Third, if we are correct, and this is clear institutional capture, I want to understand why there's been ideological stealth capture of a public service under the watch of the relevant government ministers. And if that has occurred, the Attorney General and the Director of Public Prosecutions need to sort this out. Rape prosecution policy is too serious to be sacrificed on the altar of gender identity. No, I'm sorry, this far and no further. This is too serious.
And just very finally, just to give the other side, my understanding is that very recently Stonewall have updated their website and added a footnote to suggest that they do not, in fact, give legal advice. What do you make of that?
Well, good luck to them. I mean, as one lawyer to another, I always admire an attempt at an exclusion clause. Let's see how that plays out, shall we?
Fantastic. Well, Dennis Kavanagh, thank you so much for joining me. And next up on Free Speech Nation, Suella Braverman hits out at the police once again. A football manager deals with a surprise disruption, and a giraffe gives a tortoise a bit of a helping hand. You do not want to miss that. See you in a moment.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle, and it's time for Social Sensations. This is the part of the show where we look at what's been going viral this week on social media. And going viral today, a GB News interview by Camilla Tominey with Suella Braverman. The former Home Secretary explained why she remained unhappy with how the police are handling pro-Palestine protests. Let's have a look.
What we've seen, and let's look at the facts, is now months of
hateful marches taking place as a regular fixture on the streets of Britain. We've seen people chanting Jihad and the police turning a blind eye.
There's very many different reasons for explanations for jihad, apparently.
That was a low point for me when the Met Police came out and justified the chanting of jihad.
I mean, she's got a point. That was incredible. You had a group, Hizb ut-Tahrir, who are now outlawed in the UK, but were previously anyway outlawed in most Arabic countries, standing there calling for jihad, calling about how the armies should rise up, and the police put out a tweet saying, yeah, but jihad can mean lots of things, you know? It can mean, like, an interior struggle, which it can, by the way, but not when you're Hizb ut-Tahrir shouting about armies on the streets.
No, I think we need some context, don't we, on this one? I'm pretty sure the police got this wrong.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Suella.
Are you indeed?
Yeah, I think, yeah, more
it's
of
good
this,
that that's
please.
gone viral.
Yeah, it means that lots of people are seeing it, because, yeah, fantastic.
Yes, have you ever had a jihad, Paul?
Well...
Because it can mean anything.
Yeah, no, I've never had a jihad.
I meant it as a manicure. It's a kind of manicure.
Sorry, I thought it was a curry.
Yeah.
But, no, sorry, Chris. Trying to be professional. No.
I mean, it's mad, though, isn't it?
It is absolutely mad, Andrew. And the police, it all comes back to fear again for me.
Yeah.
They're very scared of one particular group of people.
Yes.
And they're afraid to upset them in some way. But it kind of goes against everything they stand for. The law's quite binary. It's like good and bad.
Yeah, sure.
And it's just very easy for them to stand up and say, that's bad.
Why don't you just apply the law?
Yeah.
I mean, I find it absolutely astonishing. I mean, and I also think there's something very patronising and a kind of soft form of racism about that. Is that
Absolutely.
Like, you know, we're not going to apply the law in case we offend Muslim people because Muslim people are uniquely prone to violence.
Yes.
What are they saying?
Extreme generosity of interpretation in one area and not in others. Plenty of examples of hate speech that I would like to debate.
Yeah, I mean, and we saw it before with the grooming gangs. I mean, the idea that, or the police admitting, we're not going to do anything because we don't want to appear to be racist. I'm sure your average Muslim is thinking, yes, you need to do something about that.
Absolutely.
You know, what's going on? Unbelievable. Anyway, let's have a look now at this next one. Even famous football managers have to deal with mundane life admin, but they don't usually do it in the middle of a press conference. Let's have a look.
Does it feel a bit like that is happening again?
The dentist is calling. That might be important.
Oh, sorry.
Is that what?
Just leave. Sorry.
Again, the dentist.
That is quite important, right?
I can imagine.
He has amazing teeth. He doesn't need it.
I feel like that's a bit of product placement going on there.
Of course it was. Of course it was.
The dentist. Who's your dentist?
Yeah, you look wonderful.
Yeah, very good teeth.
He's had a mortgage worth of debt.
Yeah, he's got.
Hasn't he?
Yeah, there's a horse out there somewhere without teeth.
Well, let's have another look at a video. This is the last one we've got tonight because everyone loves a cute animal video, or my producers do anyway. So let's have a look. I don't know. I think the giraffe pushing the tortoise along is kind of well, it's shaming the tortoise for being too slow. I actually find it deeply offensive and kind of racist.
Well, I'd like some more context. I thought maybe he was giving him some protection from the sun, or I don't know.
Or maybe he was going to eat him.
Do you think?
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't
see the end, do we? It was a mega-aggression, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly.
A massive giraffe just poking him along. We don't know what he was saying in his ear, was he? Exactly. Your mum don't love you. Get out of the way.
I mean, I'm sorry. If I was walking down the street and some bigger bloke came along and started pushing me along saying you're not going fast enough, I'd call the police. I'm outraged on the tortoise's behalf. Now, this is the part of the show where we're going to talk through your unfiltered dilemmas. Thanks ever so much for emailing in with your problems. I still can't believe you do it. But anyway, here we go. Our first dilemma is from Lucy. Lucy says, I've just left my job on slightly poor terms, but they're having a big party to celebrate their 20th birthday. I've been invited, and there will be free drinks. Is it bad form if I show up? Most people do, don't they, when they get in these situations, when they've left work and there's a party and then they come back? It's a bit David Brent, isn't it? But people do it.
Yeah, and I stopped listening after free drinks. Of course you should go along.
Yeah.
I mean, she needs to act professional in some way would be my advice.
Really?
No, don't.
No, she doesn't.
No.
That's the one thing she no longer has
Cressida,
to do.
Would you do this?
Well, I guess so. Yeah, she doesn't need to be professional. She can now be herself. She can have alcohol and say what she thinks.
That's
Go
the
for
best
it,
thing about going to a
Lucy.
work party when you've left the work. Go straight up to the boss and you say what you think.
Yes.
Not here, of course. I love the boss here. And we're going to move on to our second dilemma. This one's from Sophie. Sophie says, I like to keep my WhatsApps spick and span, so I moved my ex to the archive folder. Now he thinks I'm raging because it looks like I'm ghosting him. It's been 8 months since the breakup. Surely he belongs in the archive. I think delete altogether. Delete and block, move house. What do you think?
I didn't know there was an archive folder. This is fascinating. I've got some admin to do later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what a WhatsApp groups are? I mean, they just go...
They do.
You leave them for 10 minutes and you've got an essay going on
absolutely.
in there.
Yeah, I think block is
block
reasonable.
and move on. Life's too short. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, it's 8 months later. Why is she talking to him? Because the idea is, the premise there is that he's been put in the archive and he in some way knows that that's happened because she appears to be ignoring him. Move on. Move on. What's up with you?
OK, well, we've got time for just one more, I think. This one's from James. James says, my girlfriend keeps telling me that she'll vote Labour in the next election, but has no idea that I'm a member of the Conservative Party. Do I come clean and risk jeopardising the relationship? I would say that it would enliven the relationship. It would give it a bit of a frisson, a bit of a kink. Do you think?
Well, maybe for about 15 seconds, and then it might be over. I don't know.
Yeah. OK, well, look, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Thank you ever so much for joining us for Free Speech Nation. This was the week when Elon Musk announced that he will be saving humanity. And myself and Paul Cox formed a double act called Chief Gay and Chief Gammon. Near you soon. Thank you so much to my panel, Cressida Wetton and Paul Cox, and to all my brilliant guests this evening. And by the way, if you want to join us live in the studio and be part of our wonderful audience, you can easily do that. The address is right there on the screen, www.sroaudiences.com. You can apply there, come along and join in the fun. Stay tuned for the brilliant Mark Dolan tonight. That's coming up next. And don't forget, Headliners is on every night at 11 o'clock. That's the late night paper preview show where comedians take you through the next day's news stories. Thanks for watching. See you next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. If you remember what weather conditions you had on Sunday, you'll probably see very similar conditions on Monday as we start off the new week. Systems are very slow moving at the moment, high pressure situated towards the south, but this weather front has become stalled across areas of Scotland and will provide very persistent rainfall across particularly western districts, the Highlands, Argyll and Bute as we head throughout the night. A rain warning is enforced and some flooding and disruption is possible. Elsewhere, a reasonably cloudy night. There's some clearer spells developing through central areas at times. Mild for all of us though, temperatures not dropping much lower than 9 or 7 degrees Celsius. A chillier start to the new week for the far north of Scotland though, with a touch of frost. And as this rain band just pushes ever so slightly northwards into the cold air ahead of it, we could see a touch of snow for the likes of Caithness, Sutherland, even to lower levels for a time. But that rain will really be persistent across western areas and it's going to provide a very miserable and wet day here. Again, relatively blustery and cloudy for most other areas. Some patches of drizzle to watch out for. Mist and murk around coastal districts. Temperatures a touch down compared to the weekend, around 9 to 12 degrees Celsius. On Tuesday, that rain band will eventually push its way slightly further southward, so moving into Northern Ireland, Northern England, a bit of mountain snow possible here as well. To the south, you hold on to that mild, cloudy, blustery theme, but to the north, we open up the doors to something a touch brighter, with some snow showers, but also colder, and those colder conditions are slowly going to push their way across other areas of the UK throughout the forthcoming week. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are